My name's Trent. You're here for the Bug Bounty Battlefield. This is a choose-your-owner adventure for why I stopped reporting bugs. I just want to take a quick moment and really thank SAINTCON for having me out. Pope was bombarding me for over the years and years to come out here. And I really didn't know how awesome this con is. It feels like DEF CON, but I can go through the halls and don't smell people, and I can get into things, and but I don't think that Pope really knew how awesome this was for me. It really this is something that I really stopped giving these talks. So I think DEF CON was the RIP was the last talk that I gave. So it's been quite a bit, but there was a magnitude of mixed motions of giving this, because this is kind of like my life of where I started in computers, and there's a lot of nostalgia in this. So how many of you have reported a bug? I'm just curious. Awesome. Got some hackers in here. And how many of you had a bad experience reporting a bug? Okay. Yeah, people got two hands up. Yeah. Awesome. So we're going to be good friends here. So let's hop into here. Just to give you a little background. My name is Trent Lowe, Director of Security Research for MMC. I also happen to run DCP, or for those who knew at DEF CON parties, the Twitter account and all that calendar. Also founder at SecKC. I'm a dad, husband. I built all these slides on AI. So if it goes off the rails, we'll kind of blame it on AI. It just had like a hallucination or something. But really, I've been focusing a lot of my time doing AI things. So I really hope that you guys like stories. Just to kind of give you the outline, we're going to just quickly brush over the landscape of the bug bounty, and then we'll get into some adventures, and then we'll kind of recap of what's going on, and we'll do that little Q&A. So, bug bounty landscape, there's many platforms, and we've really moved into a really interesting space because, if you can remember a long time ago when we would just like scan things or, poke at stuff, like a lot of lawsuits came out of there. And just recently, we're still having, I think it was Missouri was freaking out because some reporter, went to inspect Element and, viewed the code behind. And, I think it was the mayor was like, I'm going to take down this guy for, viewing the code on the website. But it's gotten a lot better. At least you can, approach companies. Because when I gave a talk many years ago, I was really nervous because I just didn't know what would happen by exposing this thing, especially because the company did not fix it. It took them a while. So, EFF was a great resource for me early on. I'd reach out to them like, hey, is there anything that I should or should not say? But, the landscape has changed. There's great platforms. There's companies that are, involved. And, I'm constantly seeing these big, huge numbers of millions of dollars that are going out to researchers. But fortunately, I'm not one of those guys that get all the researchers. So let's go ahead and get into this adventure here. So, and just so you're aware, the tools that I typically use is just Chrome. I don't use Burp Suite or anything that if, I was talking to some people earlier, if I were to use a tool, it would probably be Zap. And even if Zap's not even supported anymore, I would just use it just because it's old school. I hear that, woo. All right. So this is going to how it's going to work. There's going to be some options that we can pick. So you can pick that we go down the bug bounty route or we continue on the security researcher. But there's also going to be some other things that you guys can pick and choose about, the adventure itself. All right. Do you guys remember HyperCard? Anyone remember HyperCard? Awesome. I want to hang out with all you guys. This is the area where when I was making these slides, I remember like making video games using HyperCard, and HyperCard is kind of what prepared me, I guess, for my career of making slides and presenting, the hypercard of those games. And around like 1993, 94, my mom was a school teacher, and she wrote a grant, for AOL. And it came with a slew of hours, and I was immediately hooked. Or we have people here who've used AOL. So the same awesome. Okay. So American Online. And so way back when, I discovered a way to use AOL for free because my mom came to me and she said, "You cannot use this. This grant is for my school." So I was already stealing from the government at like age 13 or 14 or something like that. And so I'm like, all right, I need to find a way. So I ended up finding that if you type the keyword launch in the keyword of AOL, it would bring me into the free area and paid area, the normal area. So I could access both. And so what do you guys think? Should we try to report the bug? Like, yeah, no, yes. Okay, nope, yeah, sure. No? All right. We'll report the bug. So I reach out, I go into the help chat, and I'm like, "Hey guys, do you have a reward?" Because this is, I'm very young. I don't even know, like bug bounty is not even a thing. So I do you guys have a reward to, provide me with something, and they're like, "No, but you should do this out of the goodness of your heart." Stream. Oh, okay. So I'm like, do you guys a bug bounty? And they're like, "No," or not a bug bounty. I'm like, "Do you guys have a reward system?" And they're like, "No." And so I'm 14. I'm not interested in goodness of my heart. Being 14, you're kind of rebellious, or you just want instant gratification. So unfortunately, the princess is in another castle. So I didn't get anything out of that. So I naturally reached out to my friends like, "Hey, you guys want to use AOL for free?" So I start sharing this. And I originally started on the Macintosh, and then eventually I got into the Windows side of things. And there's this really cool thing that happened, sharing that community of, the hacker feel. Like I really miss that the nostalgia of the hacker feel of AOL and everything that went into that. So as we, journey down this, I showed this to my friends, and they were like, "Oh, this is awesome." But eventually someone's like, "Hey, do you know about this?" I'd say that's like goosebumps to me. So I end up learning about AOL. And as I was giving this talk, I really thought about it. I'm like, everything that I still do to this day came from AOL. Like phishing was a big thing. Like that's where it came from. I remember the first time like someone tried to phish me on AOL. And I'm like, "What is this?" And like the guy responded, he's like, "It's phishing." Like, "What is it? Oh, just phishing?" Like, okay, thanks. But this was phishing, it was spoofing, we had Visual Basic code, we had all these things, and we also had like Redbox and zWarDialing and pager bombing. And I had these friends that I met online, and we were doing cool things, and it was just fun, and we were just kids. And so I always wish that we could always go back to that. Like that was just like a moment of time that I was like frozen in, but I really miss those days. So the things I learned, I journey on as many years later. I came across some things called Evite and Eventbrite. How many of you use Evite? Awesome. Okay. Eventbrite? Okay, a little bit. What you guys want to do the Evite? Want to do the Eventbrite? We got a choice here. Like Eventbrite? Evite? Evite? Okay. Evite? Okay.
You suck.
I'm gonna do the opposite of what you guys say. I mean, we could, but so Evite was a fun one for me. So initially, I found that I could find out who the guests that were invited to the party. Like if I couldn't see that, because a lot of times I don't want to go to the party because there's this like certain individual that I just do not get along with. And I have the ability to view who was invited to the party. And so I was just kind of like abusing some services. And there was also a cool thing is that I could also assume the identity of the person that I didn't like. And then I could click unsubscribe. So they would never be allowed, they'd never know about the party. They'd never get the email about it. So that's kind of where this went. And so do you want to report or you want to do security research? Continue? Okay. We'll do research. Okay. Well, no, we're going to do the security research. So because they did not have a bug bounty program, I submitted to Shmoo. And, this was a really great time for me. I got to learn. I met a bunch of wonderful people like Dave Kennedy, Ralph Mudge, Paul Asadorian, Larry, Bruce and Heidi, and the dude who drove me through the winter storm of hell at ShmooCon, who's walking around the hotel drinking beer out of a trash can. Brandon, I think was his name. Lost contact. I still owe that guy like a ton of money for doing what he did for me. But so at Shmoo, this was probably 2 or 3 years later after I initially found the problem where I could assume the ID and unsubscribe. But now I've found some other things. Like I could assume the identity. I could reuse cookies. The cookies never expired. I could actually take over the event itself. I could remove the host from the event. And I could also email the guests without the host knowing. So I had all these features. And one time my neighbor had mentioned to me, like, hey, you're going to the Christmas party. I'm like, what are you talking about? So he sends me this thing. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's an Evite. Awesome. Let's take over this. So it was a New Year. Sorry, it was Christmas. It was a New Year's party. So I emailed everyone on the list that said that this is now a costume party. And the couple that was hosting this, she thought that her husband had done this and like literally cornered him and just read him the riot act on like, I can't believe you did this. So he actually came out and he was yelling at this other neighbor that they always fight with. And he's like, why are you yelling at me? Why don't you go talk to the security guy? Like he's the guy that knows how to do this. So naturally it was me and I just laughed it off. I'm like, whatever. But, even though I didn't have a bug bounty and I didn't earn anything from it, I still got to go to Shmoo and I met some great people. And I continued down, this route of doing bugs. Then I was doing some work for IR, and I can remember we were trying to track down this host that was on the network, and looking at the host and trying to identify who this was. I did see that there was some traffic to Southwest, and we had discovered that Southwest wasn't using TLS, and because they weren't using TLS, I could decode the barcode that gets generated. And then I had discovered that, I could be A00. I really wanted to do this because I just didn't want to go to jail, but I thought it would be really funny to go up to like the business guy who's, has the clout of A01 and stand in front of him and like, well, I'm A00. It just, So unfortunately, Southwest didn't have a bug bounty program either. But do you guys remember cheating in those books, where you would, look, you want to look back and kind of see. So we're going to do that. We're going to go back a little bit. I took this talk and I gave it, I reached out to Southwest and they're like, okay, cool. You're going to give a talk. They didn't address the issue, but they don't have a bug bounty program, but they do have the money to fly someone out to my talk, sit in the corner, bring a video camera and record me the whole time. And to make sure that I didn't say anything that, was bad or made Southwest look bad. But Jason Street invited me to give a talk at Route 66 and, great conference. I actually gave 2 different talks there. I talked about Eventbrite because the Eventbrite, since we skipped that, the Eventbrite vulnerability was in the URL. There was like an error message that I could control, and I could also control the redirect link. So I submitted it to them. They're like, "No, we don't have a bug bounty program, but we'll get you on our wall of fame." So they ended up patching it, and so they're like, "Hey, it's fixed." I'm like, "Awesome." So what I ended up doing is just putting ampersand and then copying that same vulnerability and pasting it again and hit enter, and it works again. And I'm like, "Hey, try harder." And so I only got one out of that, but in this talk, I also talked about other bug bounty programs. Like the Route 66 talk was about, do companies have bug bounties and how fast do they respond? And so I found vulnerabilities in things like Google Plus and Target and JCPenney, which then kind of drove me down this weird path of looking at photographs. Like JCPenney's and Target had the same software that, and I was corrected earlier. So I was going to say pregnancy photos, but they're the maternity photos. And those photos inside there that I was able to access and view are those photos that, you don't want your friends to ever see. And I saw some weird things in there, but continuing on, I started looking at like Bass Pro photos, because I would take Christmas photos. They would give you the free photo, but they'd have all the watermarking, and I was able to bypass all the watermarking. So I had all these vulnerabilities, and I'd constantly reach out to these companies. I'm like, "No, we don't have anything." But the researcher that I was, and the person who I wanted to be, was to give this stuff to these companies so they could fix it, because a lot of times that stuff really impacts your friends or your family and stuff like that. So I wanted to do the right thing. And those who know me, who I'm all about shenanigans. So it's like, what? Who is this guy? But continue on. I wanted these companies to have these vulnerabilities so they could fix them. And it was, just an idea of that if they would fix it, if they would pay me, but at the end of the day, I just wanted it fixed. So continuing back on, using the Southwest. So the research here, I took it to Trixie. So SecKC, is there anyone from SecKC here? Got any people from SecKC? No? Okay. Yeah, SecKC. They put on like a hacker talent show, and I showcased, hacking TSA. I showed how you could use a barcode and essentially just get on a plane. And the how I was able to do that was people would post photos of their boarding pass, and I would message them on Twitter. I'm like, "You really shouldn't do that." And they would block me, and I would get angry. So I'd take their ticket and then go into Southwest and cancel their flight. No, I did not do that. But I did discover that I could, depending on which leg you are on your trip, I could have adjusted their ticket. I could have changed when they were going to leave, because in that barcode, it's not encrypted. And, I could have changed that stuff. But from this, I won $1,000. I won SecKC. I was so excited, or Trixie. I was so excited. I'm like, okay, well, I kind of made some money. It's not really a bug bounty, but it was all my research that I had done over the years. So and at the same time, I started speaking at things like B-Sides and InfraGard. So I'm using these talks. I'm not getting bug bounties, but I'm still sharing the mission. And then comes Yammer. So Microsoft had a bug bounty program. I'm like, awesome, big company. They're naturally going to have something here. So I found a cross-site scripting vulnerability in, I think it was somewhere in 2017. And 17 days later, after I reported to them, they's like, "This doesn't qualify. It's out of scope." I'm like, darn. Okay. But 5 months later, they said that they had partnered with HackerOne, and I had noticed that Yammer is in that program. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's submit it. So I submit it. I get a case number. They fill out the investigation, and there's like, "Hey, this qualifies for a wall of fame." I'm like, really? I'm just still getting beat up here. So I'm like, so I spent 10 months working with Microsoft on this, and they're like, "Hey, wall of fame again." So, I'm always asking for updates and waiting, and it's just too long. So I'm like, okay, well, let's take a look at Microsoft again. And at 2019 now, I submit 3 vulnerabilities to Microsoft in an email because it's the MSRC, and you just email them, and they respond back to me. We can't do 3 vulnerabilities in an email. Open individual emails, and they close. I'm like, okay, rage. So on 416, I find I submit separate vulnerabilities. One of them being the workbench vulnerability. And what I was able to do with this was, and I'm just kind of showing the impact, and like just maybe you decide how much this vulnerability is worth. So I could do domain user enumeration on anyone who used SharePoint if you shared a document externally from your company. So if you were to share a document outside, I could take that, snatch your cookie, and then use the workbench and enumerate your domain. I could just query things. So naturally, I reached out to a friend who worked at another company that shares a lot of documents publicly. And I said, hey, why do you have 2 domain accounts? And she was like, hey, why do you know that I have 2 domain accounts? And I explained to her, and she's like, Jesus, okay. And so I ended up submitting this, to them, and they take a look at it, and I end up getting $5,000 for this vulnerability. Okay, it's not bad, but I'm like, it's kind of unfair. I think this is worth a lot more because but the thing that I didn't like from this was that Microsoft never said anything about it. They just patched it. And those of us who were using cloud services, essentially we're just renting their computers and their software from them. They can make this fix, and you would have no idea that maybe someone compromised your domain by dumping out all the information, the computers or whatever. But no one knew about this. And, I have this actually tagged on my Twitter account because it's just something that just drives me insane. Is like, so now since we're renting software from a company that, we don't control the software, and when they apply patches or fixes, they can just make changes and they don't have to tell us. It could be a huge vulnerability and they just quietly sweep it up and we would never know. And it's just still something that can happen today. And I don't know I don't know how to answer the problem, because they should have sent out a notice and said, hey, you should check your environment, look at these logs. And they would probably be like, hey, if you really want to see these logs, you have to buy an E5 enhanced plus, and then you can see these security logs that I was talking about. Okay, fine. So then I find those 3 vulnerabilities. I end up there was an account enumeration. And they're like, this is working by design. Like, okay, they close that, which is kind of common. I've seen that before where Microsoft, if you can identify that there's an email on the tenant, Microsoft typically says this is working by design. So someone from the outside can enumerate or check to see if this is a real email address. Okay, I'm not going to get too crazy about this. But then I found a SharePoint domain takeover, meaning your SharePoint URL that's your company's. I found that there is a way to clone your tenant, and you can move it somewhere else. And by doing that, I found that I could just put an IP address in the URL, and I can redirect you to my SharePoint that I stood up that looks a lot like your domain. Maybe use something like evil Jinx and copy your cookie or steal your password. And so I ended up submitting this to them, and they say, well, we looked at this and we're not going to fix it. And they said they're going to close the ticket. And so I'm like, okay, but you guys did fix it. And I was so furious about this because they fixed this vulnerability that in this email, the way they addressed it is hey, this doesn't meet our requirements. And feel free to blog about it, tweet, talk about a conference, and let us look at your slides so we can control the narrative. But I'm like, man, that's not how you, like it just like I felt like they were just like being like just I don't even know. I just felt something was wrong, and I was very upset about that. But and because of that, I actually had another vulnerability that I actually disclosed at DerbyCon. It was a DLP bypass, and it was through Power Automate. And essentially, I just ghosted them because they're like, "Oh, we're interested in it," and I never responded. And so I gave the talk at DerbyCon, and as soon as the talk was over, these two Microsoft guys came over, like, "Hey, we'd love to, figure." I'm like, I was probably really rude to them. I'm like, I don't want to deal with you guys. I'm not interested. But thanks to DerbyCon that they were able to give me that, and but no thanks to Microsoft. So I can say all this, but I do have the receipts. So don't you love AI? You can just like, hey, make a sandwich with receipts in it, and we have the receipts. So let's take a look at these receipts. This is literally what they said to me on the, like, we've investigated the report. It doesn't meet our, bar of service. We will not be fixing this, and we look forward to, working with you. And so I respond back to them. I'm like, Sarah, I don't know how I feel about this because you said you're not going to fix this, but you did. I tested the vulnerability and, gave me a message. So then she writes back and she's like, oh, thanks for reaching out. We were going to fix this, but then we didn't. And then we figured out we did. And so now I qualify for to be on the, the board of thank yous again. So I'm literally mad about this. So I continue on and I'm like, they were able to fix this. I'm like, well, great. But, she apologized and, she's like, well, if you could have weaponized this, so now you take my vulnerability, I give you the opportunity to fix this. You take my vulnerability, you fix it. And now you're like, well, why didn't you like fully weaponize this? Why didn't you do this? And on top of that, they're like, also social engineering it lowers the score. I'm like, well, in this case, it's really not all that much of social engineering. It's that customer's domain. All I have to do is send them the URL and they could mouse over it. They could do whatever. Yeah, that's our domain. Like I was able to control it. So I'm continuing to just get angry about this. And so she's like, I send back this like really, trying to be nice and professional. And I end up just saying that I don't think that this program is a repeatable process. You're not able to effectively fix things and reward researchers. I'm just mad, just super mad. And so she replies back to me and she's like, well, because it was, led to such a quick fix, we fixed it. I'm like, so if it just, if it was longer, if it took longer, then you would have given me a reward. I just didn't understand. And I was just angry and I didn't know what I should do here. So, I'm like, I am never going to work with Microsoft again. Because I've actually met one of the guys that was running the vulnerability program at Black Hat, and he came over and talked to me, and I told him the story, and he's like, let's talk. And I'm like, I'm never going to work with you again. If I find a vulnerability, I'm going to sell it to a government or like give it to Vupin and he was like, okay. But y'all remember COVID? All right. So COVID comes out and the school sends me an email like, hey, just FYI, we're going to use this thing called Zoom. And so I'm like, I need to take a look at this. This is something that could impact my kids. Let me take a look at this. So, everyone was using Zoom for all sorts of things like school and work and telemedicine. And when I took a look at it, I figured out that I could guess 4 rooms, and after the 4th attempt, I would get a CAPTCHA. So I'm like, okay, cool. What if I change my IP address? And so I changed my IP and I'm like, oh, okay, I can guess another 4. And so I ended up using Microsoft's Power Automate. I built this, tool and it's, running and it's capturing all these valid rooms. And, naturally what you do when you find something cool, you share it with your friends. So, I've my new adult friends that grew up in the same era of me, and I am them like, hey, check this out. We can guess Zoom rooms. And the whole premise behind it is that it's not, it doesn't have a passcode, but they have this service built in. But free account, they don't give you the protection of having a passcode on the room. It was like it wasn't secure by design, and that's what I really wanted them to do. And unfortunately, when I reached out to them, I gave them the bug, and I waited, and I was really, I'm like, we need to get this fixed, because we were hearing on the news about all the Zoom bombings where people were joining and like doing inappropriate things to schools and classrooms. And that's just not something I wanted to deal with my kids. So I messaged someone that I know called Brian Krebs, and I said, Brian, do you contact that Zoom man? He's like, what do you got? I'm like, oh God, okay. Let me show you. So I ended up talking to Brian about what I had found. And by then, my friends, my buddy Bill was like, hey, he's AKA Heaven Sent, was like, hey, I like this. I'm going to build this in Python, and I'm going to connect it to the Tor network. So after 4 tries, it's going to automatically go to a different IP address, and we can start to scrape. It's like, okay, cool. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. I'm going to go and figure out how to scrape the information out of the Zooms without connecting. Because if you connect to someone's Zoom room, it would typically say like someone's joined and send you an email. I didn't want that. So I perfected some of the code, and I gave it to Bill, and he started working on his part. And during that time, I was also telling the company like, hey, we need to turn this capability on. And so ironically, this bug is still open, but it is fixed because I think it was 3 or 4 months later, they decided that, hey, we need to make this secure for everyone. It's not even just the pay. So they Zoom they solved the issue, and they were able to fix this. So that's what I really wanted. So when I always see that little code up in the URL, I'm like, yeah, I helped make this here. And I was very, happy, humble. But then comes Zoom, and they're like, hey, we paid $10 million in bug bounty fees. And so that just then drives me like, I'm like, well, then why didn't you pay me? Like, why you didn't even address my ticket? And it's been 4 years, and they've never said anything. I just left it as is. And so we had this tool, zWarDial. It was this felt like it was the old school tools of AOL era. It was awesome. It could, Zoom was essentially just phone numbers. So we just built a war dialer, and it was dialing into these various rooms, and we're scraping all this data, and we could see some really crazy stuff. I could see that Acme Corp was going through an IR case with some big IR company. I could see that this company was going to merge with this. I had insider trading information. I'm like, this is crazy. That, I could have abused, but, I just left it as is. I'm like, you guys need to lock this down. And so it was around, I think, May 9th of 2020, they went ahead and said free basic accounts will also have the authentication or the code. So from then, my friends were like, we should release this. I'm like, no, we should not release this, because this thing is super dangerous. You could get, you'd guess like 100 an hour. And we took this data, and I reached out to my friend Corey, and he likes to mess around with data, and he's like, hey, look at this. Majority of all these Zooms that we're capturing all have to do with the healthcare. So, I mean, you can just imagine if you're just sitting there, your doctor's explaining something, and someone were to join your meeting that maybe you didn't know that they were there and they were listening. But you can also see like the education system. So those are the two main things that are pretty scary in this. Telemedicine was probably pretty big here. So, conclusion. at the end of the day, I just wanted to make the internet safer, and I was glad that I was able to do that. Protect the kids, family, and friends. But I never, I don't think that I was ever compensated correctly, and it's just a challenge that I have, and it really did bother me, and it made me stop talking. It sucked. It really hurts because I wanted to share all this stuff, but I was mad, and unfortunately, that's just how it was. And I really appreciate that Pope came out here. Man, I love you, man. That you pushed me to do this. So I hope that I can be back. I hope that we can have these conversations where we can challenge and we can figure out how we can fix this, because I would love a place that we could take a vulnerability and to give it to a company and they find the right way. I'm like, Casey's here. I've been talking to him. I'm like, I want to find a place where we can just give these vulnerabilities and researchers can be paid, people can be safe, and companies can fix this stuff without applying NDAs. Because a lot of the researchers, if you've ever reached out, they say, hey, you need to sign this NDA, and you never know what happens with that. You're under NDA, so you can't talk about it. So if you reach out to a company like, hey, we want you to sign this NDA, then they're like, oh, we have a bug bounty. Here's what we're going to pay you. And you can't talk about it. You can't fight this system. And I hope that we can, make a change here. And so that, for my mental health, thanks for SAINTCON for coming out, Pope. Love you, brother. I'm so glad that you were able to, push me to come out here and talk again. And I hope we can, have this conversation and figure out where we can go from here. So, questions?
One of your categories was dating. Tell me some story.
Actually, I don't know. We'll have to reach out to Corey and say, oh, you're asking the one of the categories in here was dating. I don't know. There's probably
Answer might have been.
Yeah. I guess maybe in COVID, that's how they did it. I think that's what it was. They were like speed dating. Yeah. There was a lot of interesting things. One thing that I never addressed is I actually have a new vulnerability in Zoom, and it has to do with their AI system, and I just don't know where I should go with it. But
Thank God.
It's a pretty cool one. I've already I've already attempted to use it on my boss, and he was like, I do not like this. He's like, I was wondering what this email was from Zoom, but any other questions? Yep, go ahead.
Here. Water tap space. Or there. Or you. It's baseball. Then you right. Just let me.
So the question is I'm just going to paraphrase here. What would be a good, a fair bounty, and between small business and where could we go? I've tossed the idea around. Why couldn't we give this to a vulnerability company and they make a blog post about it, they handle it, and maybe the generation of money that's generated from the blog post would come to the researcher. And on top of that, you would have other researchers that, could impact the sway of the amount of the value of the bug. And maybe that's something that gets hosted at Black Hat at the end of the year. We take all the things and we say, hey, here's the fame, here's a bunch of money that companies, had submitted, or, things that are to reward. But I just don't know. I just want to open this conversation. It's like, it's broken. I had conversations with Casey earlier, and he sees the pain. He understands where I'm coming from, and I just don't know yet. I have ideas, but I don't know if they're all the right. They're not matched up correctly. I just don't know yet. So, working with Casey, maybe we can come up with an idea. Any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
You mentioned that you have some ideas, but the only thing I go like it had to be a path. It is to take it out of the company, what it is, legislation, because if there isn't a framework, force these companies not be able to hide behind entities, to not be able to hide behind, well, thanks for your free work, you're stealing the blood. In fact, essentially, that's what they're doing. They're stealing your time, your effort, your labor. That's the only I can think of. Legislation to force to make sure that they can't get paid. Having all of these customers, they affect the government. That never asked you guys considered that. Like,
I haven't. So he was asking, like, he thinks that an idea might be using legislation to, force these companies to pay and fix. Because I've submitted anonymous bugs through like US CERT, and they're great. Working with US CERT is great just because they're not going to be strong armed. Like, they're coming from, they're backed up by the government. So, when the company says, hey, we're going to patch this next week, so you need to take, we're not going to address this, or we're moving to a new piece of software next year. We're not going to fix this. They're like, that's not how this works. Like, this is a responsible disclosure. We need you to fix this. So I think we do need, some government help here as well. Because you're right, the the NDAs that are put on these researchers, a lot of time it hurts. It hurts the community, because especially if it's one bug that it's in this one product, it's really in all these other products as well. And we don't know it's there, but we can't talk about it. Researchers can't get up and say, whatever. Luckily, all the companies that I was, dealing with, they didn't have bug bound programs. They didn't ask me to sign NDAs, and they probably will now after seeing these talks. Like, we need to get an NDA. We need lawyers and lawyer up. Any other? Oh.
Okay, just add to that, like, that you said. The other thing about this, like, the character.
Yeah. So he was just saying, Casey was saying that, being able to reward and, punish at the same, like, reward and punish the companies. Good question.
Some guy types this.
No, he just Neil's having some fun with me.
And see that.
Yeah. No, he's harassing me. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, my God. Yeah. A lot of definition. Pure shit that want to take, right? A lot of other people. That means there's a lot of other people. There's parts of them that want that one. And there's a lot of bounty hunters. So,
yeah, sure. So what he was saying is that a lot of times that, if I submit first and then he submits, he doesn't get the reward, and there's not a lot of communication between researchers. So, like, maybe I'm under the NDA, but he's not, and maybe he wants to speak about it, but at the same time, the company could patch it by then. So, Yeah, I understand where you're coming from because that happens a lot in bug bounty programs where 10 people submit the same bugs and it's like the first one there. So there also should be some sort of thank you mechanism. So I don't know what that should be, or maybe a less of value of vulnerability, like hey, here's a free coffee or something.
Good like these. And now our signal base.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Really like to implement about the not if I can pay right. That's where it starts. Like I don't know it something.
So in a previous life, what he was saying, like he doesn't know where he should start. Where you should start is I would look at other programs such as like BugCrowd or HackerOne and just just get an idea of how it works. You can go out there and see the disclosure and what it happens, because you have to understand, like once you know about it, you need to fix it. And a lot of these companies just try to sweep it under or put it under NDA or other things. So I don't have the advice to tell you like on how to start the program. At a previous life, I started a program and the lawyers got involved and, they said, hey, we need to make them sign the NDA first. And then we talk to them. I'm like, okay, I understand the mission here. We tell them, no, we don't have a bug bounty, but if you sign this NDA, then we can talk. And then I'm like, after they sign the NDA, they're like, oh, we do have a bug bounty. So we're starting this relationship off on a lie. So it's hit or miss. Like I don't have an answer for you, unfortunately. Any questions? Oh, go ahead.
So I'm like,
huh?
My gym. And so I just don't put down.
So he was saying that he's new to this field and he doesn't have any technical skills, and I think that's completely wrong. I think you do have technical skills, especially because you're here. So kudos for you. I would say still participate. I mean, you can at least go to like these like BugCrowd and HackerOne and learn from them. I mean, you could even go and look at my old talks and just get an idea of where this stuff is coming from, because ideally it's everywhere. I mean, these vulnerabilities, you could probably spend today and find a vulnerability in some company and it's super trivial, but unfortunately don't have a program to support that. So, right.
When it comes to researchers, what's your primary motive? Is it about numbers, money, or just doing the right thing? Or is there or how do you look at that? I'm thinking about how do you get more attention on what you're trying to do? But it's also helpful to understand in your motive, because you spend an incredible amount of time doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more a lot into it. What motivates you to do it? What at the end? Maybe it's different for each person. What are the rewards?
So the question is like, what's the motivation and what's the reward? So the motivation for me was, at the end of the day, I just want everything to be safe, especially because it involves all of us here. And it's hit or miss. Like money's really not the thing, but when I'm looking at it in the news and like Zoom's coming out and say, like, we just dropped 10 million usually. I'm like, well, why am I not involved in that? Like, so it's hit or miss with me. I don't know how to address that correctly, because at the end it would be great. Like maybe all bug bounties are free. Casey's like, shut up. And we're just going to fix things, but I don't think that's it. We should be rewarding, because these companies are making massive amount of money, and you're taking these researchers. So they didn't pay for a pen test. They didn't pay for a red team to hack at. They didn't pay for all these things, the time and money that, someone found something and I took the time, I wrote a great paper on it. To give you a good example, when I was transitioning between two different companies, I had some free time and I asked my wife, I'm like, hey, can I have that bus app that you use to see where the bus is? And she gave it to me. And, with that day, I found that I could add kids that don't belong to me. So I knew their student ID, their name, and I could see what bus stop, where their bus stop was. I could watch the bus. I sent them an email and I said, hey, you have an hour to address this, or I'm going into the school. And so I go to the school, talk to the principal, and he's like, I understand this is super dangerous. I don't know how to help you. I can call the company. I have contacts, but I can't talk to them. I'm like, I just need your email. I took my time. I wrote a whole thing on how it all works and what they should do to mitigate this. And I gave it to him for free. So, I mean, that's just something I just spent out of my own time because I don't want anything happen to people, friends and family. So I don't know how we could address that, like the motivation. Go ahead.
It's almost like doing the research is the enjoyable part. You should be paid for having to deal with the company after. But
yeah. So he's like, you should be rewarded. You should be paid with dealing with the company because, these big companies, it takes like 5 or 10 months. And I understand that because they have timelines, they have things that they're working on. And when a researcher comes out of the blue and says, hey, I found this bug, what can I do? Pause everything, change the code, those type of things. What should we do? Like, because now you have someone who's essentially like extorting you, kind of. Because I'm not one of those researchers. I'm sure all of you have had those emails like, "Hey, I found a bug in your. Do you have a bug bounty program?" I don't start that way. I say, "Hey, do you have a bug bounty program? I found a vulnerability. Like, let's have a conversation. I'm willing to share it with you because I want to get it fixed at the end of the day." But yeah, we need to find a way to reward the people correctly. Thank you so much.